Hello and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. Folks, today I want to talk a little bit about, and my guest is going to organize around this, but I want to talk a little bit about the transferability of skills. Yeah, just kind of from one domain into another. And what happens when you approach moving into another domain? And I'm going to talk about this specifically in terms of leading your organizations and that kind of stuff. But if you come to it thinking that you already know everything, what's the consequence of that? And the fellow that I'm going to be introducing you to here in just a minute has done this journey. He's got a great little book out that's called Learnit All Leaders. Learnit All Leaders as opposed to Know It All Leaders. And his journey is actually fascinating. I first met him in an office hour show that David Meltzer, my partner, and I host. And I was absolutely enthralled with his story. And in that little 15-minute segment, we did not have a chance to go anywhere other than this is interesting. So I've invited him on the show, and I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. Damon Lembi, welcome to the show, and let's see where we can land this ship.
Well, Blaine, it's great to be here, and I agree. It was nice getting to meet you on office hours, and I think we just, very similar in what we believe in and talk about. So it would be nice to move on from just the tip of the iceberg and continue our conversation. So thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. My absolute pleasure. Thanks for saying yes. Just so the folks know in the background here, you were a world-class athlete, and I say were just because we've aged, and so things happen as we do this. But you were in the College World Series in baseball with the Arizona State University, and you were drafted by the Atlanta Braves. But there was something that happened with your professional career, and there's an intersection between becoming the amateur sports into the professional domain. So I'm setting that up as just kind of a frame here. Can you talk a little bit about your journey to where you ended up coming up with the idea of Learnit? And folks, we're going to talk about Learnit, his organization, Learnit. And as we go through this here, because there's a fascinating resource there that I want you to be able to take advantage of. But just kind of, how did we, what's that transition move?
Sure. Well, first of all, if I recall our last conversation, thank you for saying a world-class athlete. If I recall, you were a big-time gymnast yourself.
Well, I was, but I wasn't in the World Series.
Yeah. No, anyways, so for me, my very quick version of the journey was I got drafted out of high school by the Atlanta Braves in the 13th round. Back, I'm dating myself a little bit, but back in 1990. And I had this opportunity, do I continue and move forward in minor leagues baseball, or do I go and play in college? And I originally decided to go the college route. I started at Pepperdine, and I did it. It's really my first big lesson in leadership because the Coach Andy Lopez, had a tremendous vision. And that vision was, we're going to work together as a small university and win the College World Series. And he got everybody to buy into it. My first year there, I got hurt. I ended up leaving. And sure enough, the first time and the only time in the history, Pepperdine won the College World Series. So that was amazing for them. I then ended up at Arizona State, played there, got to play in the College World Series, hit a home run in the College World Series. I guess that's my claim to fame. I figured I was ready to continue. I had all my eggs in the basket of being a Major League Baseball player. The season ended, and I didn't get drafted. And, you're kind of at the crossroads, and I really had to determine, what do I do next? And like a lot of athletes who are transitioning from one career to the next, you kind of lose your identity. It's like you thought your first 23 years of your life, you're one thing. And now I wasn't quite sure if my skills were transferable and how they would work in the business world. I was really fortunate that I came from a family with multiple businesses, large real estate, but also at the time, my dad was coming up with this idea for a computer training company called Learnit. And he did what a lot of great entrepreneurs do, is they come across a problem and then they figure out how to solve it themselves. He took a class some at a place called I remember back up in Seattle where you live. Egghead Software had a company, but
Oh
the
yeah.
owner had a company called Catapult. He took a class. We got to know that gentleman very well, Victor, a hobby, I think. And I thought it was a little slow and sterile, and there's got to be a better way to do it. Short, engaging classes, and that's where Learnit started. I was just finishing up my baseball career, and I decided to start as a receptionist at Learnit. And again, it was because, like what you mentioned, I wasn't sure if my skills were transferable. And
Mhm.
so I started at the ground floor, wanted to make sure everybody knew that I was there to work, not just because my dad put me someplace. And fast forward 7 years, Learnit has moved from being fast forward from 7 years, I went from being a receptionist, teaching classes, sales, and then becoming the CEO. And over the 28 years, we focus mostly now on management and leadership. And I'm proud to say we've helped upskill close to 2 million individuals over the last 28 years. So
Wow.
in a nutshell, that's the Learnit journey where we're at today.
Yeah, Damon, thank you for sharing that. There's a couple of touch points there. I mean, Egghead. I used to shop at Egghead.
Yeah.
That was a, yeah.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that name for a long time. Um, the idea of skill transference. There's a couple of ways that I want to kind of unbundle this here. But what skills did you find that were actually transferable? And how did you have to amend them? Uh, for use in a different contextual environment.
I love the fact that you just mentioned how do you amend them for a different environment, because I'm on an advisory board of a business school out here, and we talked about this helping the athletes transition and how you take those skills that I'll mention and then you mend them so they can use them in the business world. I would say that the skills, and I didn't really realize at the time, but the key ones are collaboration, discipline, uh, learning agility, which I think is one of the most key skills out
Mm-hmm.
there today. And then, of course, for athletes, it's dealing with failure and overcoming failure. Those are just a couple of them, along with communication. And how you had to amend them is really, you know, start with, overcoming failure and having grit or be resilient. In baseball, if you fail 7 out of 10 times, you're basically going to be a millionaire, right? So you
Yeah.
learn how to dust yourself off and get up. And the same thing, if you're a solopreneur or you're in sales, I mean, the path. I mean, I'm excited to say that I've been here at 28 years for Learnit, but it hasn't been a trajectory like this. There's plenty of downfalls and mistakes, and you just have to keep going. And so that was a really big one that I learned as far as a skill transferability. Another one, I don't even know if you want to really call this a skill, but one of the things I talk a lot about in my book is how to overcome imposter syndrome. And in baseball, when
Yeah.
I first got to Pepperdine, I went from being an All-American to coming into a college playing, and everybody's at that level. Everybody's at the top of their game. And as a young kid, I didn't really understand, or I had a lot of self-doubt, and it really took me by the time I got through Arizona State to really learn how to deal with that fear, that self-doubt, and work through it. And that's something that's really carried over in the professional world.
You mentioned learning agility. I think it was Warren Bennis that wrote something about this, and um, yeah, I saw. Yeah, I just put an article up on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago about learning agility. Um, can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that? Because as a leadership skill set, and I'm going to put it in the hard skill functional area here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's really well understood because there's two pieces there. One is learning, and the other one is agility. Yeah, how do
Mm-hmm.
those two mesh? Because
Mm-hmm.
folks oftentimes think that it takes a long time to learn something.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to give you my definition or what I think, and I'd be curious to see if it's in line with what you think. When I say learning agility, you look at it like the average skill span used to be about 5 years. And now with the rapid pace of technology and how the world's moving, it's down to less than a year, even some, they say 6 months. So you practice and you pick up these skills, but sometimes it's less about that because they're outdated very quickly. It's your ability to learn and understand how to learn and keep learning. And to me, that is my definition of learning agility. And you learn a lot about that going back to, in sports, is that you're constantly tweaking, whether it's your batting stance or, I really learned there how to become a good learner and, getting curious, listening and moving that skill set into the future. And that's why I think learning agility is such an important skill or function, however you want to call it, to have moving forward in the future.
I'm on the board of the Unstoppable Foundation, and folks that are regular listeners here have heard me reference this before. It's a foundation my wife started 15 years ago. We do a lot of work in sub-Saharan Africa. And one of the things that I first noticed when we started doing some work there was that the schools that we were building, the schools that we were sponsoring, they didn't call the participants in the schools students. They didn't call them pupils. They called them learners. And
I like that.
I mean, when I first heard that, the learners are here. The learners are, it's kind of, wow. Language creates reality. It also reflects reality. And that use of, these kids are just, I am absolutely fascinated. I've got chills as I'm talking about this. These kids are absolutely fascinating to me because, they run to class. They can't wait to learn. And
I love that.
Part of it just has to do with setting that expectation that you're coming into this building as a learner, not as a student, not as a pupil, not as somebody that's going to sit there and absorb something. You're a learner, and embedded in that is, how do you ask questions? All of this, what are you paying attention to? In the work that Learnit does, how have you, and I know that you've done this, how have you integrated that learner concept into the ways that you actually work from an L&D, leadership and development perspective with the clients that you're working with?
So how, first of all, what we'd like to do is you work with your client to better understand maybe some of the skills gaps that they have or the outcomes or the challenges that they're really facing. And the ideal customer, Blaine, let's be honest, are companies who believe in the value of investing in their team and learning. I mean, and there's a big difference between companies who say they do and they actually do. And you know this as well as I know, learning is hard. It's not a one shot and then you're done. I like to use the analogy of an individual who goes to the gym and they run on the treadmill as fast as they can for an hour, and then they don't come back for a year and try it again. It's like a company who wants to do a corporate retreat and in an hour want to cover, let's become more self-aware, let's focus on time management and how to have difficult conversations, and just think that everybody has that skills and figured out. So what we try to do at Learnit is we have what's called like learning sprints, and we're a virtual instructor-led training company for the most part. I listened to one of your episodes where you talked about, having to make that major pivot. I would say going into COVID, we did about 30% of our training virtually. So we were able to make that pivot pretty well. And we still do some instructor-led in-person training. But really those sprints are designed for you do, maybe a 2-hour session once every 3 or 4 weeks, and they build on each other. They're stackable skills that keep kind of progressing. And in between that, and this is one of the things we're working on right now, is really infusing some type of technology, whether it's gamification or some type of virtual reality, which we're not there yet, to help learn those skills and become more retention, make them more sticky. Because I don't think that you can just go to a 2-hour workshop or a 1-day workshop and not really have any accountability. Because like I said, learning is tough, and it's something that you need to stick with and be consistent with over time.
Yeah, I like that because it's the overtime piece that is intriguing to me. And that I run a mastermind program that's a year long,
Yep.
and it's a year long
Absolutely.
for a reason. It's that yeah. Yeah, you're referencing sprints here, but yeah, there's weekly learning opportunities that take place. We meet once a week. That repetition, and what I'm addressing there is in that repetitive process is a shift in mindset. Yeah, how do I think
Mm-hmm.
about what I'm doing and how I'm being? And it's that being question that keeps popping up particularly in the mastermind, that when I'm working with the folks. Yeah, boy, there's just so many rabbit holes I could go down here right now.
But what I like to say about that on the being part, because that kind of goes back to what you're talking about, the students and being learners, and
Yeah.
I think that James Clear talks about that in his book Atomic Habits, where you put
Yep.
yourself in your mind, I'm going to be a healthy person, I'm going to be a learner, I'm going to be a great, coming in. That's what your being is. In my book, I break down my book into two areas: being and doing. And the
There
being
you
is
go.
all around mindset, the learn it all mindset, and the traits, which I consider to be humility, not to be the smartest person in the room, curiosity, we talked about that a little bit, integrity, doing the right thing, and also courage. And when I'm talking about courage, what I'm referring to is getting out of your comfort zone and trying things and not being able to be afraid. And that's really what I talk about from the being perspective. And then the second half of my book is the practical, here are some tools to be able to learn how to do. Um, Going back to the mastermind, I think that that's fantastic. And also, different people learn different ways. Some people are all about in-person training, small groups, whatnot. But I also think it's critical for some, especially like senior leaders and executives, is the one-on-one coaching. We don't do that a lot ourselves at Learnit because our core audience is individual contributors through middle managers. But for me personally and other senior executives, CEOs I work with, I think individual coaching that they can bring in executive coaching where you can bring in the real world experience, talk it through, try it, and come back and you're held accountable. And
Yeah.
to me, that's the real learning, is the experiential that goes along with it. You could do that with training, but also I think coaching is super helpful as well.
Yeah, I want to unbundle that notion a little bit when we come. We're going to take a real quick break right now, and where I'd like to kind of move is a focus on process versus outcome,
I love it.
because that's kind of one of the things that I'm hearing you speak to here,
Mhm.
and that moves us into, I think, also a conversation around something that you're particularly adamant about, referring to your employee groups as teams, not a family, and that there's a
Mhm.
real interesting distinction there that I think is going to be useful to explore. So, folks, we'll be right back. We're talking to Damon Lembi, CEO of Learnit, and stay tuned. The nature of life is evidenced in nature. Nature grows, and all of nature honors the desire to be more, to have more, and to do more. Life thrives when it's allowed to grow. And ideally, thriving is what we also, all of us, want to be able to do. Unfortunately, at some stage in life, most people find themselves settling into what I can only call a rut. And a rut is nothing more than a coffin with the ends kicked out. You want to quickly get out of any rut that you find yourself in. When you stop growing, that's when the coffin starts to appear. The simple truth is this, and this is true for everything in nature. You're going to die. I'm going to die. Every one of us dies. So the question we need to come to grips with is not, are we going to die? The question nature asks us to answer is, are we truly living? That's what motivation is about. It's the desire to move. It's the desire to grow and to excel. Have I lived? How have I lived? I'd love for you to take advantage of my Leadership Mindset Masterclass. It's all about providing you with the tools to ensure thriving for yourself and for those around you. Register today to receive the free introduction video and find out more about this acclaimed program. You'll also receive a copy of my international #1 bestseller, Compassionate Capitalism, A Journey to the Soul of Business. I'm Blaine Bartlett, and I look forward to helping you thrive. Welcome back, folks. Before we took a break, I positioned a conversation that I wanted to have after the break with Damon, and it has to do with the distinction between focus on process and outcome. He had mentioned the value of having a personal coach, particularly as you moved up in the organization as leader. There's something about a discrete focus on how I'm being that gets missed if I'm just doing kind of a broad-based training approach to things. I want to be able to have some high-touch feedback in what it is that I'm doing, which is organized around process primarily. As a coach myself, I pay a lot of attention to what's the process that we're engaged in here, not so much what the outcome is. What's your thoughts on that, Damon? In terms of, and I know that Learnit, you've got your own modality and you've got your own structure and what you're doing there. But how does this work out for you? Because I know that you address that in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, I have you ever read the book Bill Walsh? The score takes care of itself.
Yep.
That's kind of about if the theme of it to me has always been it's all about process. If everybody are doing the right things. If whether it's the people in the locker room, to the players, to the announcers, to the HR department, if everybody is doing the process and following the process and collaborating, the score will take care of itself. It's the same as what we talk about process versus outcomes. And I'm a big believer in that at all levels. I have a 6-year-old daughter and, she had a race coming up and she's like, well, Daddy, what if I don't win the race? I'm like, that's fine. I don't care if you don't win the race. I want to see the effort you put into it. And that's the same thing with leading a sales team, let's say, for an example, where it's like we don't focus on, especially in the first year that somebody's there, on the actual numbers. We focus on the process. Are they coming in? Are they doing the right things? Are they getting curious? Are they asking the right questions? Having deep discovery? Because if you do the process, going back to what Bill Walsh said, the outcomes happen. But you have to follow the process. You can iterate on it, but I think that is the main thing. And you can't go from just A to Z. You can't just shortcut it. Sometimes you have to go slow to end up going fast. To get things done correctly.
And that's the whole idea of learning is embedded in process. It's not embedded in outcome. Outcome is what I get after everything else is done. But how did I? Yeah, I'm reminded. There's a story told about the Tour de France, the English Tour de France team, and England had never even. Yeah, they're almost always considered to be a no-show in the Tour de France, and they got a new coach, and the new coach started breaking things down. How do you put your foot on the pedal? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, does it does it rest on the ball of your foot, or where is it? And the small little pieces, process, focus.
Yep.
And in that was learning. Learning in the sense of muscle memory, but also learning in terms of the system. Everything fits together. It's not just an isolated piece.
Absolutely.
And they ended up winning. The team ended up winning the tour, and it was kind of like they came out of nowhere. And it was this focus on small incremental process pieces that strung together. The outcome will take care of itself. And that's what I hear you're speaking to.
Exactly. And I look at it, that's one of the things we're trying to work on at Learnit is really focus on habit change, for behavior change. Yeah. And it's not, it's just small incremental changes done over and over, getting 1% better that compounds over time. That is a great story. I read a book, I can't remember if Black Box or whatever it's called, but it escapes my mind. But that's a great story. It's all about consistent practice, getting a little better each step of the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the Kaizen notion. The continuous improvement sort of a thing. And I can't do that unless I'm learning, which means I can't be the smartest person in the room saying I know it all.
Well, that's where it all. That's in my opinion, that's kind of where it all starts, right? Know-it-alls, they come to the game they got it all figured out. Their way is the best way, and I think you really stifle your growth with that type of mentality. Where on the other hand, well, I'd like to say I love what David said in our office hours. He said it's better to be interested than interesting, right? Is that what
Yeah.
he said? You
Yeah.
know, and the learn it mentality, learn it all mentality. I look at it as you don't need to be the smartest person in the room. You don't even want to be the smartest person in the room. And I
Yeah.
also think that you want to surround yourself with great talent, diverse talent, and really challenge your thoughts and ideas of in finding ways to get better. And there's that famous quote. What is it? Strong opinions lightly held. And if I think that that's what great learners do, is that even if they're really firm on something, if the facts change and there's a way to do something better, it's just a continuous learning process.
That continuous learning. I mean, right at the top of the show here, you talked about one of the things that you dealt with was the imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience with leaders that I've worked with, some of them, not all of them, but some of them that are really captured by that imposter syndrome, that lends itself to positioning. That lends itself to posturing. Yeah, I have to know the answer. I'm the leader. And there's no room for anything to happen there. It's kind of
Why
like,
do you think? Why do you think that they? Why do you think that they lean into that posturing? Is because they lack self confidence, or that they have the mentality that they have to have all the answers because their people won't trust them.
yeah, there was an interesting study that was done by Dr. Will Schutz, years and years and years ago. By the U.S. Navy asked him to come into play, or come in and consult, and they were looking. This was in the 50s when the nuclear subs first started to come online, and they recognized that because they were going to be underwater for much longer than the traditional diesel subs, they needed to find a way to compose these teams in a different way. So what are they going to be paying attention to? Well, Will's research said that there's basically three things that occur in organizations and teams where if there's going to be breakdowns, it's going to occur in one of these three areas. One of them had to do with positions around likability. Another one had to do with positioning around, am I significant? And the other one had to do with competence issues. And what was interesting, and these were the three things that came into play here. And if anybody that's listening right now has ever done a psychometric assessment for your team or your organization, it's called FIRO, the FIRO instrument. This is where this came from. FIRO, F-I-R-O. And it used to be very popular in organizational development circles. But one of the things that, and this kind of answers your question here, one of the things that Will discovered was that when people get really positioned on something, they need to be right about something. It's usually because one of these three things are in play. And the one that was most telling and most damaging in team organizational functions was when somebody felt their competency was being questioned. And if my competency is in question, either I'm questioning myself or I think others are questioning it, I will get rigidly attached to being right. I get positioned about a thing. And that can look a couple of different ways. Either you ask my opinion and I won't say a word because I don't want to be that exposed, or I'm going to take a position and stand on it. I don't care what is going on.
And die on that hill with it.
Die on that hill. So, and this is where the imposter syndrome can really wreak havoc. Is I get positioned because my competency is in question typically, and that's typically what's going on with an imposter. Can I fake it till I make it? So his antidote for that was address the perception of competence. I'm not questioning your competency here. And if I can do that for myself, it starts individually. Who am I? I don't have all the answers here.
And I think one hack or way you can approach that, and it's something, Blaine, that I use when I'm trying to get feedback from people myself, right? As a CEO, sometimes my employees, you would think that they wouldn't feel comfortable enough to give honest feedback, or get them to open up. And so sometimes, kind of what you do is you say, hey, for instance, let's just say, can you watch this podcast? Give me your honest feedback how I did. By the way, I don't think I answer this question very well. You give them you open up the door for them to show
Sure.
that you're able to. I think this kind of comes down to as well as vulnerability, and vulnerability to me, it's like a paradox. On one hand, you have to have self-confidence as a leader to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes and admit that you don't have all the answers. And the other hand, it's okay to be vulnerable, but you don't want to be somebody who's constantly, apologizing and playing the victim, right? Making it all about yourself, because then you're going to lose the trust of your team. So it's an area where it's like, okay, you want to be self-confident, but say, hey, you know what? I made a mistake. This doesn't work. I need your support, or we need to go elsewhere to figure this out. But we are going to get this done, and I think that's a different type of leadership that's now versus kind of like you said before, where people's competencies are challenged and, they get defensive and, are just going to hold firm on that. And they're not even going to open their minds to a different way that things can be done.
That shows up typically more in families, in my experience, than it does in high performing teams. And you've got a position around, working with your employees, and you reference them as team, not as family. And a lot of, particularly not solopreneurs, but entrepreneurs, small businesses, they kind of, this is a broad generality, but they lean more into, we're all a family here. That's not really what I want to have in an organization.
No.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, I've had some very close relationships with people at work. I've probably got 10 godchildren from over the 28 years. But I look at it as a team more than a family. Is as a solopreneur or a small business owner or a large company, I mean, it's your responsibility to your customers, to the rest of the team, to assemble the best team at all time. Put out an elite team on the field. And, you can't do that, especially you look at a family and you have Auntie Sue. You're always going to have to invite Auntie Sue to the Thanksgiving party, right? I mean, you can't not invite her. Right. It doesn't have to be that way. I mean, loyalty obviously is important on both sides, right? From the employee to the employer and vice versa. But there are just certain times, Blaine, where employees have maybe hit their peak. This is the top of their. This isn't going to work for them at the next level. And I've had employees on the other side of the fence who have worked with me for 15 years who've become static. And I've come to and said, one of my friends now outside of work is like, hey, you've done everything you could do here. It's time for you to move forward in your career. And so really, I look at, especially, let's say you're a new business and you're in the $1 million range, and you have a director of operations, and that person's doing great. And then when you get to, let's say, $7 million, and then, or maybe even more, 10, whatever, that person who is director of operations might have been great at this level, but they may not cut it. They may not have the skill set to get you to the next level. And as difficult as that is, it's really important for you as a leader to understand and address that if you want to scale and if you want to have a really successful company.
Yeah. And ultimately have somebody successful in their own life, because this environment may no longer be that environment that they can actually excel in. And I was hoping that you would go there with that question, because a family, it's kind of like, how do I move somebody out of the family? It's kind of like, I can move somebody out of the organization, or somebody can want to move out of the organization. I can do it with compassion. I can do it with concern. I can do it with their growth in mind. And it affects the well-being of the organization as well as their health and well-being.
Absolutely.
How do I learn to do that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's the phrase top grading, where if somebody's underperforming in a particular position, it may be time to move that person out, move somebody in. But do that with compassion. I've had situations where we've coached some of our clients, worked with our clients, but even internally at Learnit, where it's like, you know what, this is no longer going to be a fit. You've done a great job. We're going to have to make a transition in the next 90, 120 days. Now that's, but it's your responsibility, again, as a leader, to be as honest and transparent as possible, and to make that happen. So, and a lot of times it goes well. And one other point about that is, Blaine, a lot of times if you have to terminate somebody or you just have to have them leave, you're actually doing them a favor because they're overwhelmed. They're mental, they're unhappy, and it's like having 1,000-pound weight lifted off their
Absolutely.
shoulders. It should never be a surprise when you let somebody go or move them on, right? They should, through performance management.
Yeah.
But a lot of times when it comes to that point, I've had people come back to me years later and thank me for the experience at Learnit and how it got them to move on and find something that they were more passionate or a better fit for them long-term in their career.
Yeah. I love that, Damon. That's and Jim Collins wrote about getting the right people on the right seats on the right bus, and the bus is always moving, and the seats are always moving as a consequence of that.
And for solopreneurs, in that book, which I love, is the hedgehog concept, right? Moving. Find out what you're strong at, what you can make money at, and what you're great at. And have have all that and focus on that. Have that, focus in on that. So those are between the right people on the bus and the hedgehog concept. I mean, that's just a fabulous book for any of your listeners who haven't read it.
That's great.
So
Damon, where can people find out more about you and about
LinkedIn at
Learnit?
Damon Lembi. And, Learnit is learnit.com. And you can see an assortment of the classes that we have. And those are really the best ways to connect with me. Learn It All Leader. And you can find that on
the book, Learn It
All Leader, Traits
All
and Tools,
Leader.
Mindset, Traits, and Tools.
Learn It All Leader.
You can find that on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's a simple, easy, practical book to read. And I think it's got good applicable tools that you can use and fun stories.
Oh, it's very it is very practical. It's a good read. You've done a good job in writing it. It's very digestible. Yeah. So, folks, you've been listening to The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. My guest today, Damon Lembi, CEO of Learnit. Check him out. Yeah, check him out. Check the website out. And check my website out, blainebartlett.com or learn.blainebartlett.com. And there's lots of resources there. Don't be shy. Take advantage of them. And as I sign off here, find a way in your life this next week or so to be a center of distribution, not a center of accumulation. You're going to find your life works a whole lot better when you're giving stuff away. Take care, and I'll see you on the next episode. Hi, I'd like to ask you to do something for me if you wouldn't mind. If you like this episode, I'd like you to not only subscribe on your favorite site, but I'd also like you to give a rating. Ideally, a 5-star rating would be greatly appreciated. But I think more importantly also would be just some comments. That helps with the algorithm, and it helps build the audience with this. And more than anything else, if you could invite somebody else to listen, just share this episode with a friend, with a colleague. And I'd like to see how we can grow the soul of business. I think it makes a difference. Thanks.